everything off your desk. Everything off your desk. Everything. I don't want a thing on your desk. Now, paper, you can have your desk off. Yeah, be quiet, you know. But everything else, everything off your desk. All right, so here's what we have. Some people just give a little talk about your presentation, who you talked to, and what they knew, and now you know that what kind of relate to what you know too. And we'll go through. Got a few people here. A couple people thought they were going to go tomorrow, then it turned out to be gone. So disappointing. So sad. But I always enjoy these. And so, Chris, lead the way. Let me sit. If you have anybody have any questions, you can ask. But other than that, let's get going. Give me 1 second. I'll get my
notes.
That means doing my extra credit. I get extra credit. I'm doing really well. Begin.
So the person that I interviewed was my father, and some background on him. He is the son of my grandmother, who I talked about in the last presentation we had about the Vietnam War. And he lived in Tacoma, Washington for a good portion of his life, around 40 years. And then he lived in Washington for most of his life up until 7 years ago when we moved here to Montana. And he was born in 1968. So he was around his 30s when 9/11 happened. And he was working for a company called Lucent, which had broken off from AT&T at this time. So he was working for basically like a phone company. He was in the Marines for 8 years, and during it, he did a lot of electrical work. And so, going through some of these questions, what did he think about the terrorist acts before 9/11? Had he heard of Al Qaeda or Osama bin Laden before September 11th?
Let me ask one quick question. Where was he when this happened?
He was in Tacoma, Washington, and at the exact moment where he learned about it, he was driving to work and at work.
And where at again?
Lucent was the company.
But we know. Okay.
Tacoma, Washington.
All right, got it.
So he hadn't directly heard of Al Qaeda beforehand. And granted, he heard about them after 9/11, but he had heard of terrorist groups in the Middle East, and that we were sending troops there through stuff like Desert Storm. And so before 9/11, didn't know too much about the specific group, but didn't know about some of the relations about what was happening. What was he doing? So when he had first heard anything about 9/11, he was driving to work. He got a call from his brother who said, "Did you hear that a plane hit?" And at first he thought that some guy drove like a club plane into the tower through whatever means of it was an accident or under the influence. But when he went to work, that's when he realized that it was actually a passenger plane, as all his coworkers were watching it on the news. And so he originally found out through that call, but had that same idea that it was a smaller plane that hit beforehand. What was his immediate reaction to attacks? What memories were the most vivid? So for him, the most vivid memories were watching the news with his coworkers. That was when they saw the second tower get hit. That's when they saw the towers fall, and it was such a weird moment for him because he didn't directly feel like scared or afraid because we're in Washington State, so we're on the entire other side of the country. But he saw how emotional people were and how scared they were about what was going to happen. And so that was also in his mind of what's going to happen next. Are we going to go to war with them? Are we going to stay back and try to build up defenses? What's going to happen with the United States? And he remembers there were people at his work that were crying because it was an emotional moment for the United States. Another thing was number 5. What does he remember about the response of people in the United States, the international community, and the United States government? So he remembers that a lot of people were scared and terrified about what was happening, but there were also people saying that we need to fight back and go to war with them. He had talked to a few people that had those exact beliefs. And he remembers that the United States government announcing that they were enemies with Al Qaeda and that any country that aligns themselves with them would also become an enemy of the United States. That's something that I remember. Who's behind this attack to Netherlands? Why did it attack the U.S.? He knew that it was Al-Qaeda, and the reason, though, that he thought that they attacked was, one, because of the tension that had been building in the Middle East, and he thought that Al-Qaeda was upset about the U.S. Interventions over there. But another thing that he said was religious beliefs. He thought that one of the reasons that we were attacked was because we had a lot of different religious beliefs than the Middle East of Muslims. Or that was his words. Does he consider September 11 to be a pivotal event in his life, in the history of the United States? How did the attack change things? So he doesn't say that it was directly influential for his life, because he lived on the other side of the country. He didn't know anyone that was in the towers, but he does know that a lot of people did have family members that did work there or knew people in those general areas. And so he knows that it changed the United States forever and a lot of people's lives. It didn't affect him directly, but it caused us to, one, up our security when it came to airports and also just international security in general. But a lot of people, this was just an unforgettable moment because they had lost so much. Did the attack change your view on terrorism? If so, how do you feel about the same way today? He doesn't say that it changed his view because he just has always had this idea that terrorism is a bad thing and always will be. This was, granted, a moment that was kind of humbling to the United States in general of we could get attacked by something this massive scale, but he still just thinks terrorism is bad. That's just how it is. 9, what does the U.S. learn from the attacks at Darwin? He said that this was a moment that the United States learned that we needed to be more prepared. Because one thing is he felt that the United States didn't think that an attack like this could happen. We were too big of a country. We were too powerful. No one would try to do this. Yeah, it did. He also thought that the leniency of airport security is what caused this. We didn't think that something like this could possibly happen on such wide scale of all these hijackings. And so this is that, thus being the reason why airport security was so heavily increased. Any other questions? The only question I asked him was if he believed of any of the conspiracies, such as 9/11 being an inside job or something similar to that effect, and he said no. It's as plain as it is of Al-Qaeda was part of this attack, hijacked planes, hit the towers, that's it. It wasn't planned by the United States, it wasn't by some other country, it's exactly how it is.
Did he ever say anything about like Iraq or Afghanistan?
So all he thought was that they didn't have direct connections with Al-Qaeda, like they weren't in cahoots, but all he knew is that they were in the same general location that we were sending troops there.
That was pretty common. Yeah, people are living lives. Did you learn anything you didn't know?
So one thing that was kind of weird for me was, one, the fact that he lived in Washington his entire life. I thought he moved all around the place like my grandma did, but no, he was a Washington person. But also the fact that his information adapted over time about this. Because whenever I thought about 9/11, I thought that it was like everyone knew about Al-Qaeda and it was this overlooming threat, but not many people knew about it, including my father. You didn't know about it until this moment. And even when the planes hit, he was like, oh, it must have been a club plane. We didn't know it was a passenger plane, or whatever they're called, full of so many people. So it's the idea of getting more information as time goes on.
Remember that George Bush was told that. Remember we saw that yesterday. Said, oh, it's just a plane. He said, oh, that's.
And then he gets told a second
horrible,
plane.
You know, yeah. All right, good job, Rich. Thank you. Good start. And you want to go next? You have the picture up? Yeah. She got a couple pictures and then you go next. I wanted you first. Because Chris is nearest will guide you. Maybe. Go.
It's in your email.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
I'll explain the pictures kind of after this,
All
but so
right, give me a second.
okay.
All right, go.
So I interviewed my aunt Beatrix. She was about 8 during the attack. She currently lives in like the Inland Empire in California. But at the time, I don't remember the name of the town exactly, but it was this much smaller town in California. So I had asked her, hold on, this is the wrong question sheet. Trying to find the sheet for this question. Well, for question 1, my aunt Bea, and then so she hadn't heard of Al-Qaeda or really anything, but she had heard the word terrorist thrown around. Again, even though she lived in California, she lived in a much smaller town. So she found out about it in class. She would have been about third grade. She didn't really, while in the class, they rolled in a TV, like she vividly remembers they rolled in this TV that was never in there, and she watched as the first tower fell. So she didn't really understand what was going on, but she knew people were upset. The teachers were crying, and it was making the other kids kind of start to freak out. And like when she got home, like all of the adults were talking about it. And then she remembered learning more and more like throughout the next few years about what it all meant. Because, at the time, little 8-year-old, she didn't really quite have a full grasp, but she knew like something bad happened. But as she grew older, like the adults like let her sit at the adult table, she figured out what was going on. Her most vivid memories from the attacks were Bush's speech afterwards and then the towers falling. She remembers around the time the racism from the people in her community and how TSA changed. And in her community specifically, she remembered, because her family's very Hispanic, so she remembered how people in the community who were like from the Middle East would shave to blend in and like hang out around the other Hispanic people to blend in. Again, smaller town, but there were quite a few like Middle Eastern people, and just the way they treated was not great. So all she knew was that they were members of Al-Qaeda. She didn't know what that meant, but she thought that they wanted to start a war because, and how some of the people in her community, like, and just growing older, and explained it was they wanted to start a war because America was getting rather imperialistic. She didn't believe it was super pivotal to her personal life. Again, she was only 8 at the time, but she thought it was just pivotal for everyone, especially those who were considering joining the military. She specifically remembers having a teacher talk about wanting to join the military. They had to go out and fight, but he was too old. And like sometimes encouraging like other like older students to enlist. And she remembers like some of her like family members talking about how, like I said, it was very pivotal for the U.S. with TSA. She touched on the Patriot Act and like just again the racism in her own community. She didn't have any thoughts on terrorism at the time, but again, had heard the word thrown around. However, as an adult, she sees terrorists as political activists being used as tools. And when I had asked her what she thought America had learned after, she kind of just laughed at first, and then she kind of realized, well, how like the government, like again, like I was like being more prepared, TSA, and keeping like closer tabs on people, because like with Osama bin Laden, they got that direct threat, and they were like, oh, okay. And then for like the last question, like additional stuff she had touched on, which I thought was an interesting take. So clothing, she had mentioned how it gave people, like, it made people darker and kind of gave them like especially with the like internet becoming more popular as she was growing older during this time. She remembers seeing streams from the war, like just the most graphic, like she remembers just seeing people die because like the internet, like nobody really knew like how to deal with the internet at the time. There weren't really a whole lot of restrictions. So she remembers seeing clips from the war. And she strongly believes that a lot of people died that really didn't need to, terrorists being local activists. And then, so the pictures over the summer with Drama Club, we went to New York City, and part of the trip was we went to the 9/11 Memorial, part of that being the new One World Trade building, and I believe it was the Engine 9 Memorial. And then so that first picture is of this tree that they have in the park of the 9/11 Memorial, like people will leave roses. And then that was, I don't remember which tower that one was, but so they have the fountains for the towers, and the one under that, during our trip, one of the fountains has been turned off. No idea why. And then that's the Engine 9 Memorial. That's from the One World Trade building. There's another picture of it where you can see the towers close up. They're a little funky looking, but I want to show that one. And then this one is from at the very top of the One World Trade with my friend Savannah. And so that's kind of like New York. And then under here is a model of the city.
And so how old is she now?
32.
Oh, so I'm glad you
Pick someone
once you have adults, you have someone who's a third grader. So.
Yeah, she was the only one I was like with during over break for most of break, so I was like, why not?
Yeah.
And I thought it'd be interesting because like having someone who like growing up in that era, Like she definitely, one of the things she had talked about was like how TSA had changed. She remembered as like earlier she liked flying, and then afterwards she remembered like just how much of a hassle it was and how her parents were always super annoyed. Yeah. And then something she had touched on some things I had no idea about. Like I had no idea, like people like from the Middle East, especially in her community, like trying to blend in with people. I thought that was something. So
there was no TSA yet.
Yeah,
So
no, she remembered she loved flying, and then after her parents were always so upset because it was a hassle.
Yeah, that's it. I guess I don't need to change it. All right. Oh, I forgot the collector. Give me your, just, you do it at the end. Give your times.
Okay. Just take one.
Okay. All right. Ready? And just hand it to me first and second, okay? Very good. Nice job. All right, good job, Andy. All right, these are great.
All right. So I interviewed my mom, and she was 26 years old at the time. She was living in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and she was working at a bank when the attacks happened. Prior to the attacks, she didn't really know much about Al-Qaeda, but she briefly heard of Osama bin Laden. And she really thought that terrorism wasn't something that happened in the United States, like we were too powerful for that. She saw it more as a guerrilla warfare, I mean, in a way it is. But she saw it more as a guerrilla warfare tactic. And when the attacks happened, a customer had told her about what happened. This was prior to the second tower being hit. So they were watching it on a TV that they had in the bank. And when the second tower was hit, there was just a bunch of disbelief and confusion at her bank. And after that, she clocked out of work and she ran over to a local Kmart to get a radio to listen to what was happening. Because there wasn't a lot of internet access, and they wanted to hear what other people were talking about, the coverage and everything. And the memories that she said were most vivid was when the towers went down, the place was just complete and utter silence. It was very shocking for everybody. And she says that she specifically remembers lots of misinformation being spread around and just all of this fear going around. And she said that she was proud of the unity with the United States citizens, but she was sad that it took a terrorist attack to kind of unite the people. And then she said that she felt very sad for the people that were affected. And she thought that the international response, it was very positive from people standing behind America. And she mentioned that she thought George Bush's speech was very inspiring, and it brought more unity to the United States. And she says that she believes that it was Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda solely behind the attacks because of jihad or holy war. And she says that she wasn't personally affected by anything that happened, so she wasn't considering it to be something pivotal in her life, but she said that it was absolutely a pivotal point in United States history. She said that how things were changed is that when we went to war, she said the U.S. Patriot Act being put in place, which she thinks was one of the biggest government reaches in United States history. And then she talked about how traveling became more difficult because we had family at the time in Africa, and so she would go and visit them all the time, but that became a lot more difficult. And then she said that her views on terrorism definitely changed because, I mean, it hit home that this can happen to us as well. It's not just something that happens outside of our country. And she feels the same way today. She says that she thinks the United States learned how to prevent terrorism, but she thinks that that's kind of fallen in the wayside in more recent times. And then I asked her, like, is there anything else that you wanted to add to the presentation? And she said a quote. She says, "The average American citizen's memory is short, and people try to erase bad history, but unfortunately, that means that history tends to repeat itself."
Very good quote, yeah. And did you, anything else you learned that you didn't know, or you heard you didn't know?
Not really. The only thing that I didn't necessarily know is kind of her circumstances. I didn't know that she was working at her bank at the time, anything like that. But everything that she told me, I kind of already knew about.
And did she ever mention like Iraq or Afghanistan or was it?
She did not.
That's interesting. You said that 'cause I literally just read an article called "America, the Nation of Amnesia."
Yes.
Literally just read that, and it seemed very fitting. The Nation of Amnesia.
Yep.
All right, good interview. Nice job. Yeah, these are great. I love hearing you keep this off very carefully. Yeah. I know sometimes it's good to go on the same thing, but I love the personal relationship that you probably never asked for. That's what I think is so cool about these. Okay.
Okay, so I interviewed both of my parents. My mom at the time, so first for the first question, she didn't really think terrorist attacks like were gonna. She never expected anything in America. She knew that they were like outside. She also mentioned like thinking they were just exaggerated for like movies and stuff. She didn't really feel like it was ever a threat for herself. And then my dad knew that they happened in places like the Middle East. He also mentioned Ireland, like car bombing and like bridge bombing and stuff like that in Ireland. And he thought that it was just kind of like faraway places. It didn't really affect anybody here. My mom didn't know really anything about Osama bin Laden or Al Qaeda, and my dad said he had just heard of Osama bin Laden through like the papers, like the news and stuff like that. At the time, my mom was attending University of Rochester in New York, which is like 300 miles away. It's crazy. Far away from New York City, so she was safe. But she was on her way to her morning chemistry class at the university when a kid like told her and her friends in the hallway. And then my dad was actually supposed to fly out for boot camp that day, but his flight was canceled, and so he just like ended up staying with his parents and watching the news with them.
Where was he?
Great Falls.
Okay.
Yeah, so neither of them like thought that it was a commercial flight at the time. They didn't think it was a Boeing. They thought it was just like some idiot flying their private plane, because that's what like the media was telling them originally when the first plane hit. And she said she remembers her friends and classmates like her most vivid memories, like her friends and classmates crying because they had family in New York City and also like working in the trade centers, so they were like frantic. But not a lot of them had cell phones yet, so it was just kind of like sitting there waiting, just trying to like they didn't really know what to do. And my dad said he just remembered being shocked and like it kind of felt like everything stopped. Like nobody really did anything that day. Like nobody really did their jobs because everyone was just like sitting there glued to the TV, you know. Next. They remembered the response of like the people in the United States was just enormous patriotism. Like the weeks following, like every store sold an American flag, even if it was like something like a store you did not expect to sell an American flag. They mentioned like songs, movies, like a lot of artists didn't like not take advantage of the situation, but a lot of artists definitely wrote like very patriotic songs about it. They both said that they believe the person behind the attacks was Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda. They mentioned conspiracy theories, but they didn't like say they believed in them. They did say that it shouldn't have really been a shock to the United States looking back. So like it wasn't an inside job, but like there was definitely like we had plenty of time that we could have prevented something because we kind of knew beforehand. They both said it was pivotal in the sense that it was like everyone else is saying TSA, like they both said TSA was like a joke before 9/11, like it was a metal detector and they like checked your bags. You didn't even need like a boarding pass or ID to get in. Like if you wanted to go to a restaurant in an airport, you could just walk in. Like the boarding pass and stuff was at the gate. So they both mentioned that like changed a lot. And also just to get into like major buildings and stuff like that, like now in New York City, you need ID for everything. There's like metal detectors at the beginning of buildings, like crazy. And then they both said, my dad mentioned Patriot Act and said it probably wouldn't have been implemented unless the attacks had happened. And he said it was kind of worrying how fast it passed compared to other things that are of arguably the same importance. Like that passed so much quicker than a lot of the other acts that people are trying to get through legislation. But I asked, I said, do you feel the same today about the way you did during the terrorist attacks? And they said, yeah, nothing really changed. Like they didn't really learn anything new. Because that day I feel like everyone kind of understood what was going on. They said that they both learned that we're definitely more vulnerable than we think we are. not an invincible superpower. Like, bad things can happen to us too. One thing that I found interesting that they said was they didn't like the idea of declaring war on terrorism because it's basically declaring war on an ideology rather than a group of people. And it was kind of a slippery slope to declare war on terrorism and not a specific group of people, because then you could declare war on any ideology and just use that as your excuse for killing people. So yeah, that was interesting. But
Did they ever mention Iraq or Afghanistan or the wars that happened?
not really.
Did you, anything else you
Well,
did?
I know my mom's brother was in Afghanistan. He got a Purple Heart for it, so. But I don't know anything else about it.
I mean, they're directly related, but at the same time, of course, it's weird how long ago.
Yeah.
All right, good job. I'm glad you mentioned the flags. I totally forgot about that. Every place you would go, they'd be selling flags. And I wish you could say that people weren't taking advantage of it to sell stuff, but they were taking advantage of it to sell stuff. You're all true. Get this back. Yeah. I can. All right, give me 1 sec. All right, go.
Okay, I interviewed my mom. She has lived in Helena her whole life. She's a nurse at St. Peter's. She's been a nurse for about 20 years now. And at the time, she was 19, almost 20. She was going to turn 20 in October. And she was going to college at Carroll College for nursing. And she said that when she first heard about it, she was in her dorm room watching the Today Show, getting ready to go to her organic chemistry lab. And the Today Show was just like running like an all-day special, well, not special, but like an all-day coverage of what was happening in New York. And she said that she went to her organic chemistry lab and they had like a TV in the corner of the room, and there was like 150 people in the organic chemistry lab all day long watching just like what was happening. And like they didn't leave to go get food, they just sat there all day glued to the TV. So for the first question, she said that she had never heard of Al-Qaeda or Osama bin Laden ever before. And she said that she also had never even heard the term terrorist. Like, she never heard it. She didn't even know that it existed. And then the third question, she was in her dorm room getting ready and she heard about it. She said that her immediate reaction was just like shock and confusion. Like, she didn't know what happened. She thought it was a private plane. She said that there was a rumor going around the college that there was like a private billionaire plane that crashed into the towers, but that was just a rumor. And then for the fifth question, she said that the response to the people in the United States was shock and concern. And then for the international community, she said that she'd heard from the newspapers and stuff that other countries, like our allies, like France and other countries like that, they were worried about which country was going to be next. So she said that, and then she said that when she was in college, everyone knew that it was Osama bin Laden, and they were all convinced that he did it because he hated the United States and because the United States was a superpower, and they wanted to see if they could take a superpower down. And then she said, she didn't say that the 9/11 attacks were like a pivotal moment in her life specifically because she lived here. Like, it didn't really affect her. She just said that it affected like the security and stuff. And she said that the world isn't as safe and simple as it used to be. Like, she said that you could just walk into an airport when she was little, and you can't do that now. And she said, of course, it changed the history of the United States. And then for the eighth question, she said, did the attacks change your view on terrorism? She said, yes, it brought a whole new light to terrorism. Like, she didn't even know anything about it, and then this happened, and everybody knows what it is now. And she said she still feels the same way today, but she says that we've learned a lot, but she also feels that the world is constantly changing, and it's so complex, and we have to like keep adapting to new technology and new weapons and all this stuff. And she said that on September 11th, the U.S. learned that we aren't invincible. We aren't, bad stuff can happen to us too. And she said that we've learned how to up our security and better protect ourselves. But at the end of the interview, she also told me two stories. She told me a story about her friend Donna Duane. She was working in Detroit. She was living in Detroit, and she was supposed to fly to New York the day before, and she was supposed to be in the North Tower, the tower that was first hit, on the 108th floor. But she didn't end up going because she won't go up in buildings higher than 5 floors because she's so scared of heights. And she was going to go because it was a very important meeting, but she like had this like gut feeling that she wasn't supposed to go, and she thought it was just like her nerves of heights. But after the 9/11 attack, she was just so grateful that she wasn't there, but she was so sad for the person who went in her place. He did not make it out, and he was one of her friends. And then she also told me a story about her cousin, David. He was a wire mechanic in the basement of the Pentagon, and he was working in the Pentagon when the plane hit. And she said that he doesn't talk about it very much. He kind of has like PTSD from it, like loud noises scare him easily. But she said that when he got back he came back from Washington, D.C. right after that hit, right as soon as like flights went back up. He came back to Montana, and he told her that the lights went out in the basement and they couldn't see anything, and he like cut his hand really bad on like some glass thing. He didn't really say what it was. And he got out, and he doesn't remember how he got out. Just all of a sudden, like everything went black, and then all of a sudden he never went unconscious, but he like woke up, and he was outside of the Pentagon, and he could just see like the smoke billowing up outside of the building, and he still doesn't know how he got out. But he got out. And he said, yeah, he was so scared and stuff, and yeah. So he has never gone back to Washington, D.C. ever again. So that's it.
And did she mention anything about like Iraq, Afghanistan afterwards?
Well, she said that they went. Oh no, she talked about this one lady in Congress who she was like the only lady who opposed the vote to go to war. Yeah, and she talked about her, and she said that she admired her courage for that because she didn't agree with the war. And she said that she just admired her courage because it was a really bad. It was a bad idea to go to war, basically. So that's all she said about that.
Good job. Nice interview. Good. Anyway, let's do one more. Anybody want to go? Alex, you want to go? Okay. Give me 1 sec. I know I just left your pictures up, Andy. I figured why not, right?
Okay, so I interviewed my mom for this, and she was actually in Washington, D.C. when it happened, so I thought it was pretty interesting. So for the second question, what do you think about the terrorist attacks before 9/11? And she said that she always kind of felt like it felt far away for her, like it didn't feel like a real threat to her, really, but that actually kind of somewhat changed for her because the first attack on the World Trade Center, like the bombing in the basement, she lived in New York at the time, and she was in the World Trade Center a week before it happened, and she was supposed to actually go the week when the bombing happened in the basement, but because of some reason or something like that, she had to like reschedule the trip or something like that, and that kind of freaked her out, but it still kind of felt somewhat far away, like it didn't feel like a real threat for her. For the third question, what were you doing on September 11th? She was living in DC at the time, and she was getting ready for work. And kind of like you said, she was also watching the Today Show, and she remembers hearing specifically, they referred to it as a small plane, that's exactly what they said, is what she said, hit the World Trade Center. And at first she was just confused as well, kind of just like what the hell? Like a small plane hit the World Trade Center, like okay. And she just kept watching, and she called her friend in the meantime to talk about it, like a coworker or something. And she kept watching the TV while they were on the phone, and that's when the second plane hit. And then immediately when that happened, she said to her friend, she's like, we're under attack. Like she knew in that moment that it wasn't an accident anymore. And then she got really scared in that moment, and she kind of panicked, and she rushed to her office and like met up with some of her coworkers or like friends or whatever. And they were just kind of like, it just didn't seem real to them is what she said. And they didn't really know what to make of it. And that's when they got the news that there was another plane headed towards Washington. And at the time, her office it's like 4 blocks away from the White House. She was like a lobbyist or something like that at like some firm, and like she would have occasional meetings there. Anyway, so she was kind of close to the action and stuff, and of course they heard that, and they were scared it was headed right for the White House initially, was her first thought. And she was really scared, and they didn't know what to do. They just kind of tried to get out of there as quick as they could. And that's when it hit the Pentagon, and she remembers vividly seeing like just massive amounts of smoke like billowing out, and she was just like kind of in awe, just in shock, just looking at it like, oh my gosh, she couldn't believe it. For the fifth question, what do you remember about the response of the people in the United States and the international community? And she said that she noticed a big upswell in like patriotism in general, that everyone kind of, the sense of community in America became like much tighter, and everyone's like, we got each other's back, and people started, just patriotism in general went up. And what she also noted was that Islamophobia went up a lot, that there was a lot of like hate crimes and hate attacks against Muslim people that of course didn't have anything to do with it. And from the international community, especially, remembers a lot of sympathy from them, from like the allies and stuff like that. And then Britain later on, like getting involved in the war or something like that even. And that she really appreciated that, and a lot of them showed like solidarity and stuff like that. And who was behind the attacks? She said Al Qaeda, and that they wanted to just send a message, scare people, and that they were also just really upset about the United States, like kind of meddling in foreign affairs in the Middle East, and kind of destabilizing the Middle East, and then just kind of leaving it. I mean, kind of basically what we talked about. And yeah, that was her reason. The seventh question, do you consider September 11th to be a pivotal event? And she said it definitely was, and that it kind of changed the way she saw terrorism, and just in general, like how it changed the world, not just America. Like the airport security, not just in America, went up. Like the whole world now follows that model, because everyone is like, oh my God, that could happen to us too. And that, I mean, a really big deal, of course. It changed a lot of stuff in terms of that. And how I feel like it was not just an American thing either. I feel like it kind of changed how like the world viewed terrorism in general. Like everyone was like, oh my God, like that's really scary. And that it felt more close to home to her. And did the attacks change her view on terrorism? So yeah, like brought it closer to home. And she doesn't like live in fear about it or anything, but she knows now that it's like a real possibility. And like in 2016 as well, there was a terrorist attack in Berlin at a Christmas market, and it's like right next to, at the time, her office and my dad's office. They're like right here, and it happened like right in it was like a city center where a truck like crashed into a Christmas market. She was like kind of right next to it when it happened, like right in her office over there. And that type of stuff, like it still scares her because it's still like a possibility in her life, I guess, but she tries to not think about it ever, basically. And what has the U.S. learned? And she says, yeah, like the security went up, I guess, like that. But she also said that she feels like the U.S. didn't learn a lot sometimes, like just meddling in like the foreign affairs and like the tendency to destabilize countries and kind of not care afterwards, and invading countries and not minding their business a lot of the time. But that was just what she said. And yeah.
Did you ask anything else? Any other, besides Berlin, which is an interesting, we just had in New Orleans, very.
Yeah, I was thinking, that's kind of what we talked about there too afterwards. Like,
any other observations she made or anything?
Like nothing that stood out, just like those little other stories that I added in.
And how much of this did you know?
A lot of this like stuff, like what happened, I knew about, but like her personal circumstances, a lot of that stuff, like I didn't know about. Like I knew she was in Washington when it happened, but I got more details and stuff.
Something you got to ask your dad. He was there too, right? So.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And one more thing. I think he was there, wasn't he? I don't know. What do I know? One last question. Because from Berlin, there was a wave of terrorist attacks in Berlin, in Germany in the 1970s and 1980s. There was a discotheque in Berlin that was bombed and 250 people died in 86.
Oh wait, I've never heard about that actually.
No, but I'm just asking. So did you ever hear anything in Germany about that?
I've never heard about that. No, actually, surprisingly.
Well, the United States had over 500 terrorist attacks in the 1970s. Remember we were talking about the nation of amnesia? Not blaming you, but how just people just don't know. There are all these terrorist attacks and people are like, oh, it can never happen. And that's why I was asking if you knew about that.
No, I
don't
don't.
blame you,
I don't
get
know.
it.
I know the one
Something
from 2016 because I mean nowadays every Christmas market they have like pillars set up and it's like police everywhere. It's like a whole thing now.
Which makes a lot of sense, but now I was just curious if you knew about that.
That,
You know, I was gonna
actually,
mention,
I didn't.
Americans didn't really know all these terrorist attacks here. It's just weird how we forget stuff and then it's like a shock.
Mm-hmm.
All right, good job, Al. Nice, good one to finish on. Rip it off, just rip it off. And one more thing I'll say. People said, there's like how could this ever happen here? We lived under the literal threat of atomic annihilation for 40 years, and like people forget this. Literally day and night, we had to look out for fallout shelters, and then it was like everyone forgot. It's amazing to me, but we all do it. It seems to be a very human thing, no matter what country you're at. Actually, Alec, I'm not sure if your dad was there or not. I might have to do it from there. All right, good job. So tomorrow, who has to go tomorrow? Raise your hand if you haven't gone. Perfect. Who wants to go first? And then Cora second. Okay. I like these. These are great. I enjoy hearing this.
My mom also told me that because I didn't know this. One of her librarian friends, she's a librarian in university for a really long time.
Yeah.
Her daughter, Colonel, and she was walking out of the pen. She got thrown like 15 feet forward.
Oh,
And
gosh.
all she had was like a scratch on her cheek, and that's it. And she was completely fine. But she got thrown like 15 feet forward.
Scary, but lucky too. Wow.
She was so lucky.
Nice job. Wow.
She wasn't like walking out of like a main entrance. She was walking out of like I don't know, she could have been walking out of the main entrance. She was like walking out of some smaller door around like, where it was hit, and she was like 20 feet away from the building. Or not 20, maybe more than that, I think, but like she got thrown forward so far. It was crazy.
Well, it's 7:57. It's
And she said, my mom said that the lady said that her daughter didn't call her for like a day because she was just so dazed about what happened.
yeah.
And after she like got up and she was just like kind of wandering around, like she didn't know like what to do, and she like it took her like almost an entire day to like regroup and like go home.
I can see it. That kind of trauma. I mean, and everyone's going to react differently. I mean, I've had traumatic events, but nothing to that extent. You know, until you live it.
I can't imagine the actually being close to that.
Well,
It's very scary.
how you would never always think about it.
Very scary.
This is the one where it was like my 6'2" daughters that I'm like the WNBA. And then I'm like, just see a photo of it. I don't have to.
And then
The girl was like, our cats, our two sons were not playing
I know.
I really saw him repost it. Oh yeah. Followed by. Yeah.
they like come scary, but they make me listen to myself.
What I like how the way the video did it is they showed it enough, you know what happened,
Yeah.
and then they
They totally go.
Yeah. and they don't
Oh, guys.
Want to- they don't need any
so
more
much going
shot.
on.
It's important to see, important to understand.
But also, you should tell
That they
them.
handle
How
that.
many people was it? I don't know.
Huh?
I don't even know. This is my crash.
Yeah, I can't remember why. The number that sticks in my head is
Let me read the crash. I have
but it was. I remember them saying on the news when I would watch. I remember people jumping.
I was talking like that, and they were like, yeah,
At the museum, like the jumping
really
part is like
Oh, it's a cover.
Yeah, it's covered and like you have to you don't have to permission or anything. You go in and like nobody is talking. It's all silent in there. And you're just like, this is people don't look. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Or you have a little kid.
The museum is such a good space.
Actually, I've not been to that museum because we were there. Last time I walked out over there, it was hurricane season. We just happened to be there. Everything was shut down that day. And it was dumping rain. And it was just, so they shut it down. The first time I was there after, it was so so I had construction crew working in there, there was no building, it was all just a big building. And they were taking down one of the buildings because it's so destabilized when the power came down. They were taking out the 70-story building. It was really wild.
The original debris still in the house. It's like they built the museum around it. No, that's nice. So that they like didn't recognize it. So it's like in the museum.
When I was there, it was like crazy to think that 20 years before there were two humongous buildings standing there. It's insane. It's like crazy.
The walls are covered in like
Every
single wall has something.
so
That's a good idea. That's really good. And let you read it on your own and go through it.
it is one of the quietest museums I've ever been
That's
to.
true. There was like it's so many people as like tourists who like someone doesn't speak English, they're wearing their headphones and but even people that were there, it's like
I had gone to Met and after this museum, so they were in those places. They're very loud.
Sure.
So many people in there.
You were talking,
Yeah,
exactly.
and then we went to the museum and there were a lot of people in there.
yeah, when you leave you kind of just don't want to do it.
Very weird. Like you walked in and you could just feel like the weight of everything just like it's just sunk on you.
I really love it.
Yeah, I'm definitely, we're definitely. So we've had a few people going to this. That's good.
It's I think they have part of the plane. Was the planes in there too. That was like sound and safe.
I saw a picture.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure.
The one in New York, I'm pretty sure they also have little sections for the ships, the one in Pentagon, like, even though it's not there, like, they still have a little bit of
Makes
memorial
sense.
to go for those places.
That's another one I'm glad to read it. It's a couple phone messages. We got an idea. We don't need, we know. Hey, okay, tomorrow, same thing. Good job, everybody. I'm glad they're going to do a couple. Those are hard, and I've seen that a few times, and it's still hard. Good job.
I forgot to mention that when he was out working after the news, the boss or manager, like, all right, that's all what happened. You have to go home.
Yeah, you know, we kept everyone in school. We just kind of sat in the room. I mean, it would be difficult, like, you know. Yeah, what do you do? Parents are working. We talked for a while, but it was just. All right, let's go back. Good job. See you tomorrow. You're it. You're the whole class? All right. You and I. I'm ready to learn. You better. Oh.
Sorry.
What's that? Yeah. Come on.
I have no idea. My plan is going to take an article that's really simple and vocabulary words, things way too much that nobody understands. Isn't that a religion in schools?
We're not talking about the Mongols today. Don't even ask.
Dang it, I really want to know.
We build special topics. Not special topics, I mean, what's your name? Mongols all day.
It was so weird.
For being I got the solution. And it's not gonna work. We're done.
I was a little aggressive.
Any value of it. This is not tables I have for one.
30 and 15.
Where you been? Utah sick, Utah made you sick?
So. Third band is the radio.
Are you busy? You ready to talk about that notes of reconstruction, we did that.
Yeah.
Test yesterday.
Can I get those notes to you tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
I always like really want to sit down.
Nah, I'm chilling. Cause it'll be refreshing my brain.
Yeah, you're gonna stay up till 2 a.m. doing
Like that's any better.
Once I quit coaching, I quit wearing watches. We got redo them. The Mongol War, when you're ready. The Mongol invasion of the 13th century, that's what we're going to test on.
I have 5 hours to do it.
Dynamite shall be wielded by the shield. What calling it? You have to just do something.
I don't know, but I'm just gonna like speed run it. I'm gonna do the essay.
How long is it?
Not even a watch, but I have a wrist.
I'm a poetic person.
You're a poet.
Tomorrow.
I'm a poetic person. Trust me.
You're gonna smash it. You do that every time I set that water bottle on my
You're
desk.
trying to,
No.
have I smashed it yet?
Well,
I'll double check your.
Have I smashed it yet?
Because I know 15 does.
Roll the die. Roll the die. Come on. You're afraid of a water bottle?
I'm afraid
Just
of
a water. With me? Putting it in the ceiling? Yeah, those are the remnants, pictures that have been put up by. Is that a cat? Oh, no.
I can't open them.
About 150 students put that hat on and took pictures of themselves. I covered my room with pictures. And there's like 3 of them left. That was a while ago. I just kind of left them up and they all started coming down. All right, let's get going. So tomorrow, give me back your test. Would you like some homework? Let's try this again. Would you like some homework? Yes, it's overwhelming. The people have spoken. I wasn't going to give it to you. But then regular people, people on the street, working folk, came up to me and asked for homework. $7.99 to $8.16 for Friday. Magnet. You want tomorrow? I originally had to have it on Thursday, but moved it to Friday. Moved it to do on Friday. $7.99 to $8.16. And there will be an assignment on Friday. What is on Friday? So that I'm going to move to Friday, 8:16 to 8:41. And that's on the West. Well, let me think about it. Monday. Yeah. Time marches on, right? What are we doing then on? So next week, we just have to go off class all next week, couple quizzes. Monday's Martin Luther King's birthday, then after that, Tuesday's the last day of class before finals. Your final will be on Friday morning. A finals week, we'd have 0, 1, and 2 on Wednesday, 3, 4, 5, and then 6, 7. You're going to see me so early in the morning, it's going to be weird. I don't know if I can handle it. Yeah, anyone that's gonna, you guys gonna be gone?
Yeah.
Yeah, just remind me of the time, and we'll whatever time we go, it's not a big deal.
Okay, because I
How
don't
was
have.
that?
If you can do fifth period, if you do another period, any period you can do of those other days, or the makeup one, come in and do it, okay? Look, we'll figure it out, okay? If we have to do it in the makeup period, we just do it in the makeup period.
Oh,
There's a period every
So
single
birthday,
day.
so get a five.
Yeah, so there's a period like at 1:30 for an hour,
Okay, yeah. Sure.
so we'll get,
Yeah.
and I'll just be grading papers.
Alright.
Yeah, we'll get that done. And if any issues, don't worry, we'll just have to remind me. All right, so where are we? Did we get the spot, did we quit writing Spotsylvania?
Yeah.
The South had to win, the South had to hold out, or the North had to appear like they're winning before what big event?
The election.
It says it right there, the election of what year? Yeah, 64. Who's the new commander of the Union forces?
Grant.
Did we mention interior lines? We did that yesterday. Didn't I draw you that very accurate picture? This circle. Shows you how math works. And see what else. Oh, what law set up greenbacks? So now they kind of have an alternative currency, specie and currency. Yeah, the Legal Tender Act. And that's why I can still remember being a kid and people talking about currency as legal tender. Just legal tender meant currency. It's not used much anymore, but it's still around, and there's a bunch of bars in Montana that are named legal tender. There was one here. So just because there was money, they had gambling there. And so I mentioned the horrible battle of the Wilderness and interior lines. Did we get to Spotsylvania at all?
Yeah, we wrote down the date.
Did we talk about vampires?
Yes.
Yeah, we got the vampire handle. Did I tell you they dug the trenches? I told you about Cedric being shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, poor Uncle John. Okay, well, what happened was, I gotta tell you a quick story. So, they looked for a place to attack. And we talked about this, how they did it like at Fredericksburg or Gettysburg. They say this is the Confederate line, or vice versa. They marched parallel to it. And they opened fire, they tried to just overwhelm them. The casualties were horrific. Well, after a couple days at Spotsylvania, probing attacks, a major named Emory Upton, right here, where there was a 50 yards of clearing between the Confederate line and the tree line, Upton came up with an idea. Let's say this red line's a Confederate line. Instead of marching parallel, he said, what if he takes his regiment of 400 men and lines them up in two lines perpendicular, and orders them to fix bayonets, don't load your muskets, they'll creep up to the tree line, no preliminary bombardment, nothing. Just all of a sudden blow the bugle, stand up and charge full speed at the Confederate lines. 50 yards, how fast can you run 50 yards?
Very fast.
Yeah, I can do it in about 2 seconds. How about you guys? No, I think it was gear, 7 to 10 seconds. That seems about right? That's enough time for one shot. It's a pretty good idea. They were ordered, don't stop, don't fire. Sprint to the Confederate lines. One guy turn this way, one group turn that way, and you can clear out the lines. Just with bayonets. Just go charging through that shock, and then have reinforcements come. And they figured, what the heck? Let's give it a try. I always think this is kind of scary. Think about, what if the first guy falls? And they're all running with bayonets. It's like a row of dominoes, except for they knife in your back. Pop, 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 pop. And then the other one is, think about what every musket in the entire Confederate line would be pointed at the first two guys. So they have to find two crazy volunteers. Like, I'll do it. Thanks for volunteering. Anybody else want to volunteer? Yeah.
Why does the Confederate line
Well, they're ordered to hold the line.
No.
But, if they just can't take it, they don't want to get shot, that's when they would run and give up the line. But they're ordered to, hold it until they're either told to retreat.
That's so
But, when people panic, they panic.
right, so does it work for them to
Yeah, it actually worked. They stood up, they charged, the first guys weren't hit at all, which is just remarkable, isn't it? The Confederates were so shocked. They got to the Confederate line and they turned and running out with a bayonet. And the Confederates took off running, climbing out of the trenches and running. They didn't want to be stabbed. It worked. The problem was no Union force was ready to exploit the breakthrough. No one thought it would work. Yeah, they didn't prepare for it. So the Confederates took the line, but that night, now no longer Major Upton, he is now General Upton, got promoted, and now he's going to have a brigade of 4,000 men, and they're going to make 4 lines of 1,000 men each, and these middle lines would just go and break through and get into the Confederate rear. And they said the next day we'll do it right here, at this angle. Break through, and then 15,000 men under General Hancock, who was wounded at Gettysburg, will follow through the hole, get in the Confederate rear. It's a good plan. It's a really good plan. The only problem is this is about 100 yards of clearing, and you can stand there where they started this charge. 100 yards is a long ways to go if they're shooting at you. I would say 1 yard is a long ways to go if you're shooting at you, but 100 yards. And it's really rugged back here. But same deal, the next day they're going to do it at noon. And they had all the regiments lined up. Upton was ready, same deal. They snuck up to the tree line, hid the best they could, blew the bugle, stood up in 4 lines sharp. Same deal. None of the first 10 men in either one of those lines were hit. You know, guys are just shooting, just scared. They weren't ready for it. And it worked. They cleared a big hunk of the line. Union forces broke through, and it looked like they're getting into the Confederate rear. The problem was the 15,000 men under General Hancock, they got lost up here. True story, they got lost. You can take, so it's a Park Service, take these walks around and kind of walking through here, and you go back behind this ridge, and you think, how can they get lost? It's a half a mile away, the massive battle. You cross over here, and you cross kind of behind, you go behind on this walking path, and you feel like you're just kind of sucked into this forest. And these, you're in like this gully in a valley. And you can see how they got lost. The sound bounced around, they got turned around. It's like, how can you get lost when you're there? In fact, it really was kind of weird going back there. And it was a full hour before they got there. And by the time they got there, Union forces had pushed them back. And then it became just a massive attack. It's Confederate reinforcements and Union forces attack at this angle of the line. There's a big oak tree there too, called the Bloody Angle. And for 20 hours, sorry, my little sinus infection. It's very aggravating. Just tickles the back of my throat. I'm not really sick, but I just need water all the time. Because it makes my throat tickle and want to cough. Don't you feel sorry for me? I can feel it. I can feel, you know, it's your positive feelings will get me through this. Thank you so much. Back to this. For 20 hours, pretty soon it's just going to be a mob where Union forces would charge over that mound where they had the trenches. I told you about that. Didn't I tell you about that mound yesterday? The Confederates dug trenches. Then they mounded the dirt up, and then they put logs on it. So it's a really pretty high wall. You can see where these logs are right here. Breastworks right here, really heavily defended, but it's kind of created this mound. And they charged back and forth for 20 hours, and then it started to rain heavily in the middle of that. By the time the sun was going down, it devolved into this bloody slog along this kind of angle in the trench lines. And what was happening is you had these men at the front, they're just all cramming against this mound. And they were passing up loaded muskets, and they would fire into the faces of the enemy, slash the bayonet, and then kind of throw it down. Grab another one. And if you were hit, just fell right there. Hundreds of men drowned in the mud because it was, being stepped on and pressed on. It was chaos for 20 hours. In a 100-foot section of the trench line, there were 500 bodies after the battle. So they're literally stacked on top of each other. Just awful. There was a 22-foot oak tree. I mentioned that. That's the site. It was split in half, not by cannonballs. This is pre-high explosives. Simply by musket balls. Tore an oak tree, that's hard wood, in half. If it could do that to a tree, this is the oak tree at the Smithsonian. They cut it off, and it's at the Smithsonian Museum of American History. You see these little gray flecks in it? Those are musket balls embedded in the tree. It's this big. If it can do that to a tree, what's it going to do? What's that kind of firing going to do to human bodies? You know those bodies I told you about? Many of them were just mounds of flesh. They had no way to identify. They didn't know who they were. None. There's thousands of unknown bodies in the Civil War, but nothing on Spotsylvania. Just found heaps of flesh. Do you know what dog tags are? Have you heard of those? So those have become mandatory in the United States Army in World War II. Germany started doing this in World War I, and other countries followed it because, you know, you can see why. High explosives, what that does to bodies. These are just black powder, musket balls. Some men had metal like bracelets or something made, and that terrified the men who survived also. Not just being killed, but their family wouldn't know for certain. They're just gone, just missing. So I took this picture. I'll pass this around, the same picture. You can look at it, you can see it a little closer. But I'll tell you one funny story about that. Go ahead and just pass it over. I was there taking this picture. The first time I was there was I had still a 35 millimeter camera, you know, film, you know, to develop. And if you ever take a picture of something in a glass case, what you got to do is get kind of an angle. Because if you don't get an angle and take a picture right at it, you'll get one of two things. Either like a bright light, because they let you use flash. So if flash reflect in your face, you get nothing but a bright light. Or you get a reflection of you taking a picture of a reflection of you taking a picture of it. So I'm 35 millimeter camera, I try to get off to the angle, but not too much because it's got this edge right here you couldn't see. I didn't get far enough. So when I got the film developed, little picture it was, a picture of me, taking a picture of me, taking a picture of me, taking a picture of me. And I'm so mad, I was so annoyed that I just threw it away. I should have kept that. That'd be kind of a funny thing now to show. Now, a few years later, I took that picture, and that's much better. That's a good picture. But the Confederates pulled back, redug trenches, and both sides just, now the Union had this little section of the trench line. After about 10 days, they stuck at the Spotsylvania lines, but the Union could not break through. This is another 32,000 casualties, 18,000 of them are going to be used. This is a bloodbath. But we're getting near 30,000 Confederate casualties in 2 weeks. They're almost out of men. So remember interior lines. Oh, almost forgot. That's the cemetery at Spotsylvania. And this goes on. Unknown. Just unknown. No idea. There's going to be so many that they started taking the bodies back, and this is one of the unknown tombs at Arlington National Cemetery. Just thousands of bones of people they could identify. Have you heard of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier? So the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is a soldier, well, it started in World War I. France did it first because that's so many, over almost 2 million soldiers, or no idea who they were. The bodies were just. And so to remember, they took one of those soldiers and France made a Tomb of the Unknown Soldier of the Arc de Triomphe. You heard of the Arc de Triomphe in France? So that's the most hallowed ground, therefore, in France. And then what the United States did is they copied that. And so did Britain copied that, Belgium, Germany, all the countries that fought in World War I. And so that's the most hallowed ground in the United States. And so this tomb is in Arlington, but the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier to really, really remember those that didn't know would come after World War I. It's, if you go to Washington, D.C., I'll talk about Arlington, I'll tell you a little bit more tomorrow. Go to Arlington. Has anyone been there? Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Just go. So back to this. Well, remember interior lines. So the race is on to the next crossroads. The Confederates won. We've got to go quick. Next crossroads. There'll be 2 more, and then right here. The Confederates beat Union forces to Cold Harbor by 3 hours. But they were good at digging trenches now. There was a split rail fence, and they dug a trench right behind the fence. You can see it here. And then piled the dirt and more wood into the fence. So it is even a stronger fortress that went on for a few miles. And then in front of that line was a mile of clearing, just like Fredericksburg, just like Gettysburg. But this time, Meade and Grant thought the Confederates have got to been losing so many men. One concerted effort at Cold Harbor, maybe they can push through. So they did the traditional attack. You can see it here. Line up in their lines parallel and march towards the Confederate lines, hoping to overwhelm them. The men who were ordered to attack, and this one was at 1 o'clock on June 1st, 1864, they knew what happened. Some were fresh, but some had been into the wilderness in Spotsylvania. And they all knew about Fredericksburg. They all knew about Gettysburg. They didn't want to be the unknown. All of them took little pieces of paper, anything they could find to write on, and pinned it to the back of their uniform, their name, their unit, their home, their loved ones, hoping they would be, at least if they died. Because they knew they're going to march them over a mile of open territory. Same thing, Confederates open up with solid shots, 100 yards, canister, at 50 yards for the first opening attack. 25,000 muskets fired at once. In 20 minutes, 7,000 Union soldiers went down. This is pre-high explosives. There's not machine guns. There's not heavy artillery. 20 minutes, 7,000. They got to about 50 feet away. They just couldn't go through. But Meade was told they'd broken through the line. Somebody lied. They wanted to bring this good news. So Meade ordered 2 more attacks. So another catastrophe. And you can imagine the men who are called Cold Harbor, oh my God. So another like Fredericksburg, another almost 18,000 Union casualties. Almost no Confederate. Another bloodbath. But the Confederates are losing men, but so are the Union. How much can either side take? How much are they going to be willing to take? An election's coming. Do you want to be next? Especially if you're not going to win. And so, after this, oh, one thing I should add. So after a day, they finally went out to started moving the bodies. And on the body of one of the dead men. These were diary writers at that time. Everyone wrote a diary. They wrote. In the diary, the last entry of one dead man, about 10 feet from the Confederate line, it said, June 1st, 1864. Today I died at Cold Harbor. He wrote down right before the charge. Yeah.
Why do they keep doing the same tactics over and over?
2 reasons. First off, that's what they do. It's not a good excuse because they should have learned that that's what they do. And so they thought, well, this time it'll work. This time, if the men are just braver, have more courage. And don't forget, this also being ordered by people who don't have to go to charge. And the second reason is this is kind of desperation. They're getting close to Richmond, and they know there's a bunch of series of rivers they have to cross, so it's going to be really hard to get to the flank. And so they're almost desperate. We got to get through now. So maybe they're weak enough. We can do it now. Even though it didn't work, it'll work this time. They delude themselves.
John Horses let them sit in their trenches for a while and pull back and let them.
Yeah.
So they
Or do like a fake attack and move around and come back the other flank. Sure. Yeah. But they would adapt in little ways, but not enough. And you see the same thing in World War I and other wars. It's just.
How are these people in charge if they don't have like expansion tactics?
Well, that's one thing you'll find out in every war. The people who are almost always in command in the beginning aren't in command long. Because the peacetime army is a lot different than a wartime army. Just you got to adapt faster. Peacetime army, it's just different. So, this is when Grant had to accept something horrible. And they all knew it. This war is going to be decided by attrition. Does anybody know what attrition means?
Isn't it when one side wears down and just can't fight anymore?
Yeah. That means literally kill so many of the enemy. Maim, murder, hack so many of the enemy. Make them suffer so much that the enemy can't fight anymore. They just can't take so much death. They can't take so much sacrifice. They can't take so much wounded men. Ever got that? You have to know what attrition is. Attrition is that eventually one side can no longer fight. And this is the way wars are fought. It's almost never like a glorious tactical victory on the battlefield where great generals make tactical moves. No, it's who just can't do it anymore. Who loses so many men they can no longer fight. That's how wars are won and lost. And I should add, that means it's horrible. This is horrible. But that's how the United States won the Civil War. That's how how the Allies won World War I. That's how Germany and Japan were defeated in World War II. That's how the United States lost in Vietnam. It was attrition. The United States could not take any more. It was not worth it. We're done. Didn't mean we lost battles. That doesn't matter. It's who's standing at the end. All the way through Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, certainly did not win. Didn't really lose many battles. Lost a few, but didn't lose many. But who's standing at the end? This is horrible. And the problem is slow. And the election is coming. The election is coming. So, this is a great picture. Do you see it? Do you see what they're sitting on? So there's a photographer set up to take actually portraits outside, and he turned the camera and caught Grant and Meade staff officers, and they're sitting on pews they drug out of a church next to Cold Harbor. This is right after the Battle of Cold Harbor. I do think it's great. It's a candid moment. And right there, where my finger is, that's Meade, the commander of the Army of the Potomac. That is Grant. And he's leaning over Meade's shoulder, pointing at a map. Those kind of pictures just weren't taken. They're rarely taken today. Okay, maybe they weren't deciding this plan, but Grant had one more idea, and it's a good one. Here's Cold Harbor, here's Richmond. If they can cross the Chickahominy, but the big one's the James River, and attack Petersburg, they can cut off the main supply line, and that would force the Confederates to evacuate. The problem is, how do you do it before Lee gets here? Great plan. If they can attack here, Lee comes down big trenches like he did before, but you send a third of your army here. They came up with something different. Finally. And it almost worked. Am I the only one hearing a siren?
No.
One of you, they're finally coming for you. Yeah. Your plan has failed. Okay, it worked. Lee came here, dug trenches. They did this huge thing that they're going to attack right here, and 30,000 men are marching here. They had to build the largest pontoon bridge, U.S. Army engineers, the largest pontoon bridge the U.S. Army had ever built up to that time. It's a huge bridge. James River's massive. But I like this picture. See it floating? They put wood over these rafts. And then you notice they put dirt on the wood. Anyone know why they put dirt on? Huh?
It wouldn't slip.
Good idea, but that's not the reason. That's, good. Horses, if they're crossing, they see the gap between the boards, they freak out. Which you do them on horses and cattle.
Yeah.
You cover with dirt they can't see and they'll cross. And so, long bridge. So Meade is back, Grant's way back to Cold Harbor. Meade is here, and they're pushing men across if they can. And they're supposed to get to Cold Harbor and Petersburg and just attack. Attack Petersburg now. Just go. The problem is, the First Corps that arrived at Petersburg saw the most elaborate trenches they'd ever seen. They'd been dug 3 years earlier by enslaved people because the South knew how important Petersburg might be. These are the trenches after the battle. Meandering trenches, palisades for weapons. And so when they got there, and that First Corps was one of the corps that attacked that first wave at Cold Harbor under a general by the name of Baldy Smith. He was nicknamed Baldy because he was one of these things that's going to happen, people, to some of you. He went bald. He was at 17. He was totally bald. I don't think you guys, I think, might make it to 17 as far as I know. I didn't. This is stapled on. But it happens. It's life. But they attacked. Or no, they got there. And Smith hesitated and thought, oh my God, I don't want another Cold Harbor. And waited for reinforcements. There were only a couple thousand Confederates defending that entire line. And they were invalids. meaning they had been wounded in previous battles. Most of them, they called them stomach soldiers. They got hit in the stomach. They were still alive, they couldn't march, so they stuck them in this backwater position. If Smith would have attacked when he first got there, they could have taken Petersburg. But he waited over 20 hours. When Meade arrived the next day, he was furious and ordered Smith to attack the Confederates. Yeah, he was Union. He ordered them. What had happened in those 20 hours? Now reinforcements arrived and it was a slaughter. Another one of those, who knows, another, gee, there's a lot of lost opportunities. I wonder if other wars are like this. Don't write this down. I did this because I kept forgetting the name Cheval de Frise. This is as old, the ancient Sumerians did this in 3000 BCE. You make these spikes where you could, you set the Cheval de Frise up, and this deters people from marching through this, because I found out something in my years. I'm older, I'm wiser than, no offense. And I learned something just recently. People don't like to be impaled on spikes. I did not know that. So you set this up and men won't want to charge into them. Make sense? They were everywhere, but how you use them, that's the clever part. Let's say this is my lawn. I put these out in front, a bunch here, leave an open area, and put a bunch here. Do you see? You funnel the attack to one spot. And that's where you have, in 1864, your cannon with grape shot just sitting there. 15 years later, barbed wire would be invented. And so in World War I, they would do barbed wire, and they put machine guns and howitzers set up to hit that spot. Do they do that today? Absolutely. So it's amazing how much we have more technology, but how many of these things are still the same. You just have to adapt to different technology. And people still do the same things over and over again. It's kind of amazing. So this turned into the siege of Petersburg. The Union forces didn't have enough to surround Petersburg, but the Confederates couldn't push them out. And so they basically covered 2/3 of Petersburg. This is right after the end of the battle. This was a kind of a forested area. It just ruined. How long would the siege last? Any guesses? 10 months. End of June 65 till April, end of June 64 to April 65. 10 months of hell. Both sides quickly had to dig trenches. And the trench line pretty soon went all the way from here to here. This rail line was too rickety. Only one rail line supplied the Confederates. But they're still holding out. This is the trench line. So the Union forces dug trench lines parallel. They dug secondary trenches. Soon the trenches are 12, 15 feet deep because you have to be able to walk in the trenches. They build support trenches, communication trenches, go to trench. Soon there would be artillery palisades. They soon made cupolas. Basically, think about a spot where the snipers could get. They usually got iron armor, and they would shoot the little cupola. And they could be accurate 250 yards away. Tough. You have to aim up 250 yards. But yeah, they could shoot. And so, after about a week, you stuck your head up from the trench line, you're dead. And they would attack between the trenches. But pretty soon that became just as deadly as you can imagine. In fact, if you were caught outside the trenches, in between the trenches lines, somewhere as close as 50 yards, in between, not 50 yards, 50 feet. You're caught outside, you're gone. In fact, they dubbed a name for the area between the trench lines. Some of you might have heard of this name because people think of World War I when they hear this. Yeah, have you heard of No Man's Land? That was No Man's Land at Petersburg too. And both sides are stuck in the trenches. And they have to do everything in there. And think how awful that would be and how boring it would be. You're just sitting there and all you can look at is the sky. And you're sleeping in dirt. You might have a little, kind of dig into the side called bomb proofs where you get hide for the shelling, but that's it. Where's your latrines at, or the bathroom? So dug into the side and dug down. And every time it rained, those would flood. So this is Virginia, it rains all the time. It's miserably hot in the summer, and then when it got to winter, it's really cold and everything is wet. There's death all over. Dead horses, dead people. There's rats. I don't mean rats. I mean rats. ants. There's a lot to feed on. They're everywhere, and you're stuck in these trenches. Here's it. You can see them try and cover it up with a little bit of protection. Every morning, Union guns, because they had more gunpowder, would shell for hours the Confederate lines. Here are trench mortars, Union guns. Think about the water. Cholera would just ravage through there because they didn't understand the fecal matter in water. Here's what, these are Confederate soldiers, but Union soldiers are the same. World War I be the same. I guarantee you it's the same in the trenches in Ukraine right now. They're just trying to find stuff to do. So here they're gambling. But one of the most popular games in the trenches, and I know for a fact they do this in Ukraine now, but they did in World War I, is some version of putting a hat or something on top of a musket. Then you put it up over the trench line, and you would gamble on how many bullets would be in that hat in, let's say, 10 seconds. See right there, he's kind of the bullet holes. So think about what life would be like. 99% of, or 95% absolute boredom, mixed in with 5% of the time of absolute terror. Good times, huh? So if you can't go over and we have stalemate, let's try under. So both sides, this is as old as war, to dig under the enemy defenses and undermine it. And so they tried it at Vicksburg too. Some minor, they were hard rock miners from Virginia, from Pennsylvania, one regiment. And they suggested got to their commander, corps commander, Ambrose Burnside, can we dig underneath? And they said, try it. And the big problem is air. If you try to have air shafts, the Confederates will see it, and they'll collapse the tunnel. You just dig down and collapse it. So they had to figure out a way to get air in to hide the dirt. They had to use geometry to get between the trench lines. And Burnside let them dig, and pretty soon they got about halfway, and they realized, this is going to work. Let's do it. And so they figured out a way to dig under the Confederate lines. At night, they would sneak the dirt out because the Confederate spies would be watching. They're everywhere. And then the plan was to get under the Confederate lines, go 50 feet in each direction. So dig underneath, and then roll in as many barrels of gunpowder as you could get in there. And then the thought was, had to be deep enough because the Confederates would hear the digging. So they would explode it, which gunpowder is not a high explosive, so there'd be a shock wave. And that's the thought was the shock wave would concuss the Confederate line, knock them out. Maybe the line might settle a bit where the explosion was, but they'd be knocked cold and attack right there. It's actually a pretty good plan, isn't it? And so every morning I told you they shelled, and then they would quit shelling and let everybody come out of their bomb proofs, light fires, and cook their breakfast and have their coffee. So when do you light off the mine? At breakfast. When everybody thinks you have a few minutes break. That's the plan. So going into July, went all the way to Meade, and Meade got a division of fresh soldiers under a general by the name of William Ferraro. And there were 4,000 men. They had not fought before, but they were determined to fight. Did anyone watch Glory for their extra credit movie? No one did in this class? You did? Good movie? Yeah. The commander of that regiment was a guy named Shaw. Ferraro was one of his best friends. Ferraro was an abolitionist. And they're not best friends, but they were friends. And this was a regiment of black soldiers. These were those colored regiments that weren't allowed to fight yet. But because of attrition, they finally let them in the battle, and they were determined to fight. And they were determined to prove their citizenship. What a great choice. And the plan was they would crawl out into no man's land in the middle of the night, lay flat on the ground, wait all the way through the early shelling, and then wait for the explosion, and they'd be right halfway there. There'd be a shock wave, and they would charge it. It's actually not a bad plan. So they'd already be halfway there. Pretty scary, but they're going to be halfway there. And so they got the gunpowder out. We're going into the day. The day is going to be July 17, 1864. Now, they had battery-powered fuses by then, but they went out about half the time, so they decided to use, you've seen those like gunpowder fuses, that your light goes along. but it's like 175 feet long with the fuse. Going through the tunnel, then out the tunnel door, and then they had sandbags around it because they figured there'd be something coming through that tunnel from the explosion. And so they did the preliminary, I jumped the gun. The night before, Meade changed his mind and decided he can't use Ferraro's division and replaced it with a division that was half strength. That's 2,000 men of white soldiers. Remember, this was a segregated army under a general by the name of Leadley, who had fought at Spotsylvania, who had been at Cold Harbor. And they didn't even tell Leadley's men about the mine. They just said, you're going to crawl out there and then charge the Confederate lines. You can imagine how they felt, we're dead. Why did Meade take out Ferraro's men? I'll tell you real fast, a lot of people thought it was racism. That the belief, it's been said, and Meade has been accused of this, that did it because a lot of people thought black soldiers couldn't fight, they'd run away. That's not the reason at all. There was a myth going through that the Confederates were pushing, that the Union plan was to recruit black men and put them on suicide missions, kill them off. And so the United States would be a white republic after the war. Pure myth, garbage, not true, but if it was a disaster, Meade didn't want to be accused of this. Terrible mistake, though. So Leadley's men crawled out, Leadley wasn't with them. Anybody want to guess where Leadley was that night? In one of the bomb-proof shelters in the trench, drinking as much whiskey as a human could get into his body. He had a barrel of whiskey in a ladle, and I guess he was just dumping it down. So I can't do it. Yeah, I know. So then their commander was gone. They crawled out, had no idea. So come in the morning, preliminary bombardment, they quit, they lit the fuse. They could see campfires all over. Very few people knew this was going to happen. They started their breakfast. The fuse went, and like a movie, this really did happen. It went about halfway and went out. Went out. So they had to find, the tunnel's only 4 feet high. So they had to find a fast, relatively short, and crazy man who'd be willing to run out to there like that and go. Volunteers? They found somebody, a sergeant, who did that and just took off running. So I imagine him just, I'm going full speed. And he's trying to run out this tunnel. So remember the thought was a muffled explosion, kind of a concussion. Anybody want to guess what the explosion was? Boom! The whole entire Confederate line went up. All of it, everything went up in the air. Oh, so you have mud and all the wood, all the equipment, horses, men, everything up in the air and went for miles everywhere. The explosion was huge. The blast wave shot that guy so that he was just coming out of that tunnel. Boom, gone 100 feet, followed by a jet of flame. Supposedly, he kind of bounced and got up. Yeah, he went over the sandbags, fortunately. I didn't want to hit the sandbags he had set up. And the whole line disappeared. No one was ready for this at all. So all these people were around cooking their breakfast, cooking their coffee, and all of a sudden, stuff falling on them all over, including all the men and everything there. So there was a group of Confederate soldiers in the secondary trench line, sitting in the trench where they had a fire, and they had an enslaved person cooking their breakfast. Boom, they're gone. A half mile away, outside the trench lines, there was a squad of Union soldiers who had their tents set up, and they're just cooking breakfast. All of a sudden, the explosion hit, and they're like this. All of a sudden, something very big. And they could see it coming. And I guess this was his way to freedom. That enslaved man came feet down, full speed, and landed right in the middle of it. He kind of did this and looked at him. On his feet, landed on him. That's what they said. And he was supposedly perfectly fine. Like, oh my God, like this. And this is true. They took him into a tent and they charged a dime to see the flying man. True story. But then, back to the attack. Well, Leadley's men, they're all concussed too. And they just kind of stumbled to the edge now of what's a massive crater. Thus, the name of the battle. The Battle of the Crater. And that's supposed to be the explosion right here. The crater's still there. It's not 20 feet deep anymore, but it's still there. And they got to this edge and they just kind of looked down. It was pretty steep down. And what did they do? They went in. They just all kind of went in instead of going around. So they went and they kind of went to the other edge, and they couldn't get out. It was too steep. They couldn't. It wasn't easy to get out. You could do it, but it was almost impossible, especially with their weapons. Ferraro's men were reserved, and they were charging full speed into the crater too. So now there's thousands of men in the crater. Where's Ferraro? He wasn't with his men. No. What was the name of the movement to try to keep people from drinking too much? The curtail. Prohibition is to totally get rid of it. Do you remember the other name? Yeah. Yeah, temperance. Remember that term temperance once I said it? He was a leader of the temperance movement, Ferraro was. He was in the same bomb-proof as Levy trying to convince him of the evils of drink. True story. Yeah, which I imagine that would have been a heck of a conversation to be listening to. And so his men off, and then it gets this goal. It almost worked. You know what's going to happen, right? The Confederates are going to wake up. All they got to do is come to the edge of the crater and do what? They can't miss. They started propping up cannon and shooting canister right into them. And the Union forces just absolutely panicked then. And so they're just scrambling to get out wherever they can. What was a glorious, I mean, a real opportunity to end the siege right there turned into that. Isn't it? That's just kind of an amazing story. Now that is one of those, I wasn't sure if I was going to tell you. Then I said, that's too good of a story not to tell, right?
Yeah.
That's worth it, right? That's a good story. I know it's one relatively small battle, but it's also like, God. So that's what it looked like in April of 1865. The crater's still there at the national park, but they won't let you into it. They used to let tourists into the crater. Now it's only about 8 feet deep, but now they don't let people in because of erosion, which is, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. So, stalemate ensued. The problem is we're going into summer and the election is coming. The election is coming. So let's get really quick. Sherman in the West. This is my incredibly truncated version of Sherman in the West. There's now stalemate in front of Petersburg, and the war looks like it's going to go on forever. Or at least another year. That's all that matters. Sherman had 90,000 men. Sherman was a very capable general. And there's high mountains, so he could use the mountains to shield movements. The Confederate commander was the best defensive commander and the most beloved Confederate commander, Joseph E. Johnston, who was wounded back in 1862. He, a brilliant defensive general, perfect for this job, absolutely perfect. So at the same time Meade started out in May, Sherman started. Johnston, 50,000 men on a railway line that stretched from Atlanta here. Johnston's right here. But what Sherman did is he used the mountains to hide out flanking maneuvers. He outflanked it. He faked an attack here, then swung a third of his army around to cut off that rail line, the supplies. But Johnston was too good, and Johnston just pulled back. That actually happened 4 times. Tried to outflank, Johnston pulled back. Outflank, Johnston pulled back. Remember what I said, a very quick version of this? In 3 months, by July, Johnston had been pushed all the way back to the gates of Atlanta. But here's the deal. His army was completely and 100% intact. Atlanta was the second most heavily defended city in all the Americas after Washington, D.C. Looks like stalemate again. Looks like stalemate again. Did you like my very quick version of this part? I know I had to move fast, but we're jumping right here. The election of 1864 is coming. And the election, let me do this really quick. The election, the Republicans are going to, for one election, will create what's called the Union Party. The Union Party. It will be Republicans and war Democrats. Everyone got that? The Union Party. Republican and war Democrats. Abraham Lincoln, the Republican. But they'll pick a war Democrat, a Southerner, to show the Union coming together, Andrew Johnson. He's a Democrat. Now, here's the deal. Of course, Lincoln and Johnson would agree on very few things. And Johnson and the Republicans won't agree. They knew that in 1864. But they're trying to win this election now. They got to win it now. They're not thinking about any time afterwards. They got to win to finish this war. And vice presidents only break ties in the Senate, right? Or wait for the president to die. Lincoln's young, it's fine. So moving on. By the way, doesn't he look like an angry toad?
Yeah.
The Democrats nominated George McClellan, who had fired after Antietam, even though he won, but wouldn't move. And McClellan pledged to end the war. But the reason I didn't finish it, everyone knew that wasn't true. McClellan might have wanted to believe it, but if you vote for the Democrats, you're voting to end the war. And if you're voting to end the war, you're voting to end the United States. The United States, as we know, is over. McClellan had to know this, even though he swore, I will not let the soldiers I trained down. And then Lincoln is like, God, McClellan's back. I can't escape this guy. Here is one of my favorite posters. I just have to show you two posters. They're so great. But this one is Lincoln, and it says Union and Liberty. And a vote for Lincoln, he's shaking hands with a working man. This is our country we'll have. Here, Union and slavery, vote for McClellan and Jefferson Davis. And look right here, behind it, a slave auction. But what's behind a Lincoln victory? What is this? School. And who's going to the school? It's integrated. Think about the United States, how much, wait, just listen to this. Think how much it has changed. 1860, when Lincoln was elected, yeah, he was free soil. But he was thinking if enslaved people are freed, they should be sent to Africa. And now in 1864, there's a strong movement inside their party for an integrated, multiracial, multicultural democracy. That is a radically different country. In 4 years. This is a big deal. This is what the people who did Reconstruction were hoping for. Catch my point on that? All right, a little bit left to finish tomorrow. And in the New South, sound good? Did you like the story?
Yeah.
I know I spent a little bit too long on that, but I figured, what the heck? It's a good story. What time is it? 2:19. Oh my goodness. What am I going to do tomorrow? I think I'm going to teach tomorrow too. Oh, I've already talked to a few people. If there's any issues about the finals, please let me know in advance. Oh my goodness. Okay, that's funny.
Kind of aggravating that
So the